I can't let you go, there's no way. I'm already still burning. So hold me close, now baby. I do what I'm told, still learning. To take my chances, to take my time. To keep on dancing, to walk that line, yeah. You got me shifting, the paradigm. No longer wishing. You're my lucky strike. Love the way you ride. Look into my eyes, say you're ready to go. $1 million life, yeah. We could roll the dice. Act like you're surprised, but you already know. Oh yeah, got lucky overnight. Jackpot when I got the invite. Let me wrap my arms around you, cause I can't go home without you. And my heart just vibe with you, babe. Wanna go sky high with you, babe. Gotta bring you close to tell you that you're my lucky strike. And I got to tell you, if you didn't know, then I got to tell you that you're my lucky strike. And I got to tell you, if you didn't know, then I got to tell you that you're my
All right, folks. Well, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune, because it's time for another edition of the RecPoker podcast. This is the Chats edition, where every week on Monday night at 7:30 Eastern, we get together on YouTube to broadcast live an interview with one of the exciting people in the world of poker. Tonight, we're going to be talking with Kevin Rabichow, but before we do, I got to thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and Mark Prashon over at Website Amp. And the reason I got to thank them is because most of what we do here is free at RecPoker. We're a largely volunteer organization. And so their sponsorship means a lot. And so does the sponsorship of our premium members. That $15 a month helps us keep going over here, helps us do all the magic that we do. And if folks will want to get more involved with the premium membership here, whether it's to get involved with the training material we put out, or just to say, hey, gang, thanks for doing what you do, you can use that code RecPoker to get your first month for only $5. What a bargain. Speaking of bargains, I have the best job in the world. I get to hang out here every week and talk to my poker friends. My name is Jim Reid. I'm Bluffsterini in the home game and RecPoker Jim on Twitter. But I'm just the guy in front of the mic on Mondays. It takes a huge wrecking crew to get everything going over here. And if you want to find out more about me or the wrecking crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew, or you can just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them tonight right now.
I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the PokerStars home game.
And I am John Somsky. I am Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And these are the brave warriors that we will enter into this interview with. I see we've got a few folks coming along in the YouTube chat. So Phil and Mike and Joe and Martha, I'm glad to have you here. You know we're going to be giving away a prize at the end of the show like we always do. So get ready to enter the words food bank. When I see the word food bank in the chat later, that's when it'll be time to do the prize. Okay, thank you all for being here. Thank you most of all for being here to Kevin Rabichow. Kevin, thank you for appearing here on the RecPoker podcast.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Jim. Happy to be here.
Now, I always start our interviews by kind of asking our guest to define their own role in the poker space. So you've obviously been a player for a long time. You played heads up for a long time. You've been a coach and an instructor. You've put a new course together that I'm excited to talk to you about. But when people ask you sort of what's your role in the world of poker, or what's your elevator answer to that?
Yeah, I definitely think that my role in poker is primarily as a teacher or as a coach. And I didn't I didn't realize, I guess, how broad the reach of my run at once content was until I started getting out to casinos and meeting people and kind of traveling to play live tournaments and stuff. So I definitely think that just being like a person who plays high stakes, who's willing to share information, who's willing to teach the game, and who really cares about coaching, that seems to be my reputation, and I like having that place in poker.
That's awesome. I love, we talk to a lot of people who kind of like sharing that love of the game, that knowledge of the game. And obviously here on the Recreational Poker Podcast, that's a big part of what we do. So we don't talk to as many of these kind of high roller players. I know the high stakes streets of Heads Up in particular. And that's where I wanted to start with you. I know if folks are watching on YouTube, or Kim Kilroy, who just joined the chat here, if they have any questions, feel free to just type them in. But I've got a couple I'll start with here for Kevin. So recreational players like me, we generally like to just kind of sit back and make hands. We like to not pay the blinds very often. So I think we kind of naturally steer ourselves towards like 9 max or full ring tables. Some of us are getting more comfortable with 6 max. But it's just a completely different game when you're playing Heads Up. So I guess my first question would be, what are some of the biggest challenges that especially less experienced players might find when they're moving towards a style where you actually have to play almost every hand that you're dealt?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you just described, like the natural tendencies that we might have from being used to playing a full table, when you try to push yourself into the Heads Up format, I think one of two things happens. One is you stick too closely to what you know. So you're someone who's generally been successful by making the best hand, by waiting to trap your opponents or whatever it is and winning big pots. And those players get run over in Heads Up. They lose 80% of hands. They slowly bleed away their stack, and they don't make that hand they're hoping to make as frequently as they're used to, because they're being dealt in every single hand, and every hand is so relevant, right? Well, they're paying the blinds every hand is the most important thing to point out there. So there's no free hands in Heads Up, right? So you really can't. So that style of player gets beat up in that way. They just lose all the small pots, and then they wait for that big cooler, and maybe they win half of them, but the other half they lose, and it wasn't worth the wait, right? Then there's the other player type who I think is kind of prepared for the battle that is one-on-one poker, and maybe overly emotional about trying to win hands, about trying to play tough. And what they will quickly realize is that they get dealt bad hands very frequently in this format. So if they try to play every hand aggressively and they try to win every pot, they'll be sorely disappointed to find out that they've just usually got trashed. They're usually bluffing. Perhaps they're making call downs with very weak pairs, and the opponent who's a little more patient will find it pretty easy to win, all the medium to big size pots off of this player who's just like, we call it like a try hard, you can't win every pot. So there is a balance to be found there, right? You got to fight for every pot, but you also have to be willing to recognize like, oh, I've got weak hands pretty often, and I'm not going to win all of them.
Mm-hmm. And that feels like that must be a difficult thing to kind of naturally calibrate towards, because it sounds like you're saying that some players, a lot of players, even kind of overcorrect that natural tendency and go the other way. Yeah. So, what are some? So, do a lot of these calibrations just have to come into post-flop analysis because you're playing such a wide range of hands? Is it really a post-flop? Is post-flop skill at even more of a premium then in Heads Up?
Yeah, I would say, I always think pre-flop's very valuable. In full ring games, it's perhaps even more valuable than it is in Heads Up. What I find is that someone who's just kind of winging it is likely not to be making huge mistakes pre-flop. Like the average player who doesn't have much Heads Up experience comes in with the right basic idea, which is you play most of your hands, you play pretty aggressively. I don't typically see someone who's just way off pre-flop. Post-flop is a different story, right? There's a lot of miscalibrations that I'll find newer players making when they come to Heads Up. For example, just like these old school rules of thumb that say like never fold top pair Heads Up, which is I mean, probably like 70% true, but it's just these types of it's not quite that simple, right? And on the flip side, being willing to like kind of fight for small pots and call with ace high and in little situations, right? Like calibrating that side, I think, is a lot more challenging, knowing what to do in the small to medium pots that are a lot more frequent.
And how much of that is based on the opponent across from you, and how much of that just comes to being grounded in the general theory? I'm sure it depends a lot from opponent to opponent.
Yeah, for sure. I think because heads up is a relatively simple game, like there's not a lot of constraints to what you're playing. I think getting a basic understanding of the theory for these situations is very worthwhile. It's not that time consuming to get familiar with like relative hand strengths in, single raised pots versus 3-bet pots, for example. And that's not going to be nearly as time consuming as it would be if you were trying to like use solvers to learn all of full ring cash. So I would definitely say that it's the best place to start. That said, adjusting to your opponents is perhaps like the main skill that you take away from playing heads up. I would say that's the most, I don't know if it's the most necessary thing going into playing heads up to be able to hold your own. But I would say like in the other direction, if you play a lot of heads up, you will get very good at adapting to your opponents. That's a nice outcome of practicing heads up.
Yeah, no, I had kind of just anecdotally assumed that most players started with six max or full ring, and then kind of found heads up as an arena for them. But it sounds like you're saying that strategically, you might even benefit from starting to learn with heads up and then moving into those other situations. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I might be biased. This just happened to be my path in the poker world. I played a lot of heads up when I was getting started, and it was the first game that I took very seriously. It was the first game that I like learned kind of all the ins and outs of. But I definitely see now, looking back, like all the benefits that I got from that, and certainly being a good exploitative player is like got to be one of the top 3 things that I've taken away from it.
Yeah, well, it's like we say, be careful what you spend your time on, kids, because that's going to be what you get good at. And that's going to be what you end up spending a lot of your time on. So, you got to think about that too. All right, so that's really interesting. And we talk often about how it's kind of a difficult thing to practice in a meaningful way. When people are like practicing heads up with their buddies or something, there's really nothing on the line. But to have something on the line, that can get expensive for recreational players too. And people say, oh, well, I play in the blinds a lot. That's also going to have wide ranges, and that might prepare me for some of these spots. But obviously, when you're playing blind versus blind, the positional difference, the small blind is going to be out of position post flop, whereas when you're heads up, you're going to be in position post flop. So how important is that one distinction when you're thinking about training and practicing this way?
That's a good question. I would say that it's not, at least for getting the benefits that I was sort of just alluding to, like the benefits of being comfortable out of position or being a good exploitative player or whatnot. I think you can get that from playing a lot of repetitions, blind versus blind or heads up, because the commonality is that you're forced to play almost every hand because you're both paying the blinds. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't strike me that it would be that much different to just train the actual format that you're going to be playing. If you're a ring game cash player or a tournament player who plays a lot of blind versus blind, training that spot maybe just more than you think you need to would be a good way, I think, to get the benefits of heads up play. Because like if you were never playing heads up format, just pure heads up format, then the positional difference would make a huge impact on like specific strategy, right? Like if you poured a lot of hours into heads up and then ended up trying to apply those same strategies to blind versus blind, they would just be wrong. So I wouldn't learn the specific strategies for one format planning to have it carry over to the other, right? But the general benefits, I think, carry over pretty nicely.
That makes sense. I just want to reinforce to our audience something that you said a little earlier here. When you're playing full ring, every 9 hands, you have to make up a blind and a half to avoid losing that to the table in blinds. When you're playing 6 max, you've got every 6 hands, you've got to make up that blind and a half. When you're heads up, that orbit is every 2 hands. So obviously there's only one person who's taking it away from you, but I think you said it really well that you're paying the blinds every hand. So you have to try and just wring as much EV out of those hands as possible, right? Am I getting close with that?
Yeah, I mean, what, like, if you think about it, just in terms of like pre-flop math, if you're an overly tight player in a 9-handed game, that might only cost you like a fraction of a small blind or something, right? In terms of how much can be stolen from you over the course of 9 hands. But if you play too tight heads up, you're losing, you know, a half of a big blind one hand, then a half of a small blind the next hand, then a half of a big blind. It's going to be an enormous loss rate from playing too tight pre-flop. So you really do have to. It's not optional to play loose and heads up. It's very much mandatory.
There you go. I like that. And again, I'll encourage anyone in the YouTube chat to fire away if you've got any questions for Kevin. I had a whole bunch of these lined up, so I'm just going to keep on rolling. So in that case, the opening ranges, of course, like we talk a lot about opening ranges for recreational players. That's a big place for us to start. And I think you can really improve your ROI by just having good, solid opening ranges. It's a great knock-on effect. You know, you're not in trouble as much on later streets, that kind of thing. When you're, again, focusing straight on heads up, I imagine this is where limping the small blind sort of is obviously very a different, what am I trying to say? It's more valuable. It's blah, blah, blah. There's not as much wrong with it in this case when you're heads up than in other situations. What was that experience like for you when you were learning about that, and sort of like, what kind of general rules did you have to develop about, okay, well, these are the hands I'm going to limp with, and these are the hands I'm going to open with, and why? Yeah.
So I guess like two things that come to mind, you know, in some heads up formats, limping is relatively uncommon. So I would say that like in 100 big blind plus cash games, limping would actually be a good strategy. It's often computer recommended. But it's very uncommon to see human players using a limp strategy in those in like the 2 blind 100 big blind plus format, just because it's not that expensive to just disregard it entirely and just play a raise only strategy. But I found now that I'm playing more tournament format and more ante format, limping is exceptionally useful if you're playing either with an ante or if you're playing shallow stacked. So if you're playing, let's say, like, you know, 30 big blinds, 20 big blinds, whatever.
Right.
Very, very important. Even without an ante, when you're shallow, very important to be limping. So just wanted to clarify that, you know, a lot of heads up players get away never limping just because they avoid those formats. They just only play, let's say, the 100 big blind plus cash format. But now that I've gotten used to limping, what I kind of learned is something, I guess, a little counterintuitive, is that the very worst hands you have, so let's say just like the bottom 20% of hands, pretty much just always want to limp and always want to fold when they get raised. And that's just fine. Like it feels like kind of dirty to play this very face up seeming strategy of like, oh, I'm just going to limp my weak hands because I want to see a cheap flop, which is literally what you're doing. And that's like computer backed. And there's, of course, ways to protect this strategy by limping some stronger hands. But I think that as a starting point, it's important to understand why limping is valuable. It's valuable so that you can play your weak hands. And in heads up, that means the absolute worst hands in poker, like the bottom 20% of hands or so. If you never limped, you would have to fold these hands. So it's important to recognize the value of limping. Then, I guess the other kind of interesting thing is that computers very rarely, unless they're quite shallow, very rarely limp like the very best hands. So they very rarely limp like pocket aces, pocket kings, pocket queens, because there's just too much value in raising them. And your opponent's going to play a whole lot of hands no matter what you do. Like you're going to raise and they're not going to fold that much. So you're actually passing quite a lot if you limp like trap with aces or kings or something like that. So I guess the like general advice that I would say when it comes to limping is don't be afraid to limp your very weakest hands and feel kind of face up in that way. And the only reason to limp a premium hand would be if your opponent is attacking your limps more than they're attacking your raises, right? Which actually in heads up it's not that common. It's pretty common for people to play quite aggressively even against your raises. So there's no real issue with just raising your best hands and just limping your weakest hands. It feels like something you're not supposed to do, I imagine.
Yeah, I think some of our try-hardy members and players that you're describing, I think we love the balance of the game. We love the sort of elegance of the game, and so we're attracted to this notion of balance and of being balanced. But I think some of us don't. I think some of us kind of think that you have to be balanced all the time, and that can be a real problem. It sounds like you're saying you can just limp your bad hands and fold when it raised. And I mean, you might not even have to be protecting that limping range with strong hands, depending on who you're playing against. How do you tell when you're at the table with someone whether you need to be playing balanced or not? Like, how do we understand whether that's something we should even be worried about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, if I'm thinking just about like the pre-flop strategies, the things that I'm looking for is I guess the way that I learn it is by starting with a solution, right? So I'll start with my pre-flop charts. But very often, a lot of people try to memorize their pre-flop charts. I try to understand the pre-flop charts. I try to understand like why they function the way that they do. And when it comes to this limping dynamic that I'm talking about, what I noticed is that limping mostly gets like it doesn't get attacked for large sizes at a high frequency when the player out of position, let's say, has like too much money behind, right? So let's say there's like 50 big blinds behind. They're not, at least in the solution, they're not going to be attacking you with big raises any more than, I don't know, 35% of the time or something like this, which might sound like a lot, but in the context of heads up, it's not that much. So what I'm looking for in my opponent is a signal that they're playing more aggressively than that, right? So so kind of knowing in the background, because I studied the spot, roughly how aggressive they're supposed to play when I limp, or what types of hands they're supposed to raise when I limp. Then I go to the table looking for counter evidence, right? I'm seeking out with every showdown, with every bet size that they choose, whatever it is, I'm trying to challenge the assumption that they're just playing the spot well, because they're probably not playing the spot well. But it's my job to figure out in what way they're not playing it well. Are they checking with queen jack suited because they're not sure that it's strong enough to raise? Well, that's a sign that my limps really don't need to be protected because they're not getting attacked by quite a strong hand. Or conversely, they raise and at some point they show down 5-deuce suited or something. And it's like, oh, okay. I mean, that's just out of line. Like, not only is that a bluff, but it's also like too strong to bluff in the context of heads up. So if I see these kinds of signals, now I know where to shift my strategy. Okay, now I'm going to limp a little bit stronger because they're too active, or I'm going to limp a little bit weaker because they're too passive.
Nice. And that's really the art of the game, isn't it? I mean, counter adjusting to your opponent to find those areas that they're making mistakes and exploit that to the max.
Yeah.
So one thing that we talk about often is like recording information while you're playing, or like what to pay attention to, how to take notes, that kind of thing. When I'm playing heads up, particularly online, that action is going so quickly. I find it's very difficult to keep anything, to actually make any notes in real time. How much of that do you try and do in real time, and how much do you allow it to just kind of aggregate in the background and then analyze it yourself later?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty big proponent of note taking, I would say. I think that it's important to log as much information as possible. I personally find it easier in heads up than I do when I'm playing tournaments, but that might just be like a table management kind of thing. Because in tournaments, I'm often, as soon as I see something unusual, I've got 3 other hands to play, and I can't really ignore them. Whereas if I'm just playing one opponent heads up, I can kind of slow the action for 15 or 20 seconds, write down my note, and then continue. Now, of course, if you're someone who's playing 4 tables against 4 different opponents, then good luck to you. You're probably not going to take any notes. But I think that it's important to write down notes. And again, what I try to do, and this might be like difficult or a little nuanced, but I try to write down things that are surprising to me.
Yes.
So like a lot of times you see a showdown that matches your expectation, whether it's a well-played hand or a poorly played hand, doesn't really matter, right? But if it matches my expectation, I don't necessarily feel the need to write it down. But if it strikes me as unusual, I need to take note of it, because it probably is something that I'm going to want to adjust my strategy for. Whereas, presumably the things I expect to see, my strategy's already doing quite okay against.
Yeah, that's a great note. And you only have so much bandwidth, so you can't be thinking about recording stuff that you're going to make the same assumptions about anyway, right? So anytime something seems weird, that's when you write it down.
Yeah.
All right, I like that. And just logistically, what do you use to take notes? Is it in a spreadsheet or a Google Doc or a pen and paper or in Poker Tracker or something like that? What do you use?
Yeah, I either use like a notepad file or I use Poker Tracker, like for tagging hands.
Yes.
If I feel that I need to tag the specific hands. But something I actually like made a video on this when I was working on my course. Something that I've started to do more recently is sort of like transcribe my notes after the session's over. So Notepad is handy because I can leave up, like even after I've closed the client down or whatever, I can leave up the notes that I scribbled while I was playing. And very often there's just like too much specific hand information in there. It's barely legible. Like, it's not the type of stuff that you could pull up a week later and be like, oh, right, yes, I know what to do against this player. It's probably just like a poorly transcribed hand history that doesn't make sense to you anymore. So I think it's actually pretty important, like jot down whatever while you're playing. And then after you close your session, like read through those notes again and maybe turn it into like 1 or 2 sentences, right? Like turn it into a description of the player rather than all these random data points that won't make sense to you in the future. I think that part is a lot more valuable than like exactly how you take notes in game. Because I just remember noticing over the years, like I would have notes show up from some player and I couldn't remember the spot, and I read the note and it was just no help. Or I'm sure plenty of you listening have taken those notes that are just like all caps, idiot, maniac play. Like right. It's just like, this isn't helpful. Like that's not something you can turn into an adjustment later. That's just how you were like feeling when that player called you with jack high or whatever. So it's better to translate for yourself in the future so that they're actually usable.
And I think people don't appreciate the value that we get out of taking that moment to kind of curate and transcribe your notes into actionable items or like into actionable information, at least. Not only because you end up with a better, higher quality information, but also we talk about this all the time, like the process of having to go through it, analyze it, put it into your own words and put it together. That's just going to reinforce it to you in a much stronger way than it would just reading it off like that.
Totally.
And then, is this something that you do at the end of each session now? At this point, you take that time, and how long do you usually take to do that at the end of the session?
Yeah, so I guess like current day, this mostly happens to me at the casino. I've been playing mostly live tournaments, so that would look like me using like my note, my sticky note like app to write down all the interesting hands that I've had, or cataloging in like, I sort of have like calling it a database makes it sound more sophisticated than it is, but just like, player notes that have someone's name who I see regularly. And if I take these notes to myself on the phone, it'll just more be like at the end of the trip, like when I'm on my flight home or when I get back home, I'll take those off my phone and I'll put them into like the main file that exists on my computer. And that way I just have like, let's say 3 months later, I make a final table with some player who I played with back in Florida, and I don't really remember that much. I like open up my file and I search their name, and lo and behold, I have a few pieces of information on them. So that's the main benefit of that. It's just, it's not happening every day because of the format. But I would probably do it like when I played the Legend Showdown, which was a heads up tournament on Run It Once Poker a couple of years ago. I was playing back-to-back days against the same opponent in some cases. So I did have to just right after the session, take those notes, write it into a plan for tomorrow, go to sleep, wake up, reread my notes, and then play the next session.
Yeah, actually, I've been playing a little more live. I started online. Well, I didn't start online. I've played mostly online. And one thing that I found was really helpful was using Trello to make notes on players, because you can move the cards up and down depending on who's at your table that time. Because that's one of the functionalities of it that's really nice. But just having the information there available to data mine it later, that's a big one.
Right.
So you were talking a bit about your course. I know at the end of the show, Chris is going to have a question about three betting. The theme of the month this month at RecPoker is three betting. But I want to talk about, just as you mentioned earlier, kind of your approach to teaching, working with run at ones, putting this course together. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of what the course is meant to do, and then how you decided to put it together the way you did? Because it's a really interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, totally. So pretty much what happened was over the last couple of years, I devoted a lot more of my attention to one-on-one coaching. And when I say devoted my attention, like I've been doing coaching on and off for probably 10 years, but the amount of hours that I put into it was really high. So I was starting to find like efficiencies, and I was starting to find patterns in what my students were needing, right? So I think previously I wasn't able to do this because my students were too spread out. They weren't coming to me like, I don't know, I would maybe coach someone like 1 month, and then 3 months later I would coach someone else. And I wasn't able to get into a system of any kind. So coaching 3 or 4 days a week, I was starting to like find a bit of a pattern, or find a system that was working for almost every student who came my way, regardless of what format they were playing. So I was working with tournament players, heads up players, cash game players, live and online. They all kind of needed some sort of method to evaluate where they're starting at, and they all needed a lot of help with their study routine or their study methods. So that eventually just kind of, I don't want to say it hit me as like the format for the course. It was more an iterative process with the Run At Once team, where I was like, should we do a heads up course? And they were like, I don't know if anyone plays heads up anymore. And then we kind of workshopped the idea until we realized that my strength was more in this like coaching procedure than it was in, specifically heads up strategy. So the course kind of combines these two things. It guides the user through an evaluation. It shows them how to create like a solid study plan. And it goes through all the ways that I like use different tools, or use different methods of taking in information, like training sites, or watching live streams, or reading books, or whatever, but also like using Poker Tracker, using PO Solver, using other modern tools. I kind of show how I do all of that to address the different concerns that I think are likely to come up in the evaluation. And then I use heads up as like a means to show my process. So I use heads up as a means to show like how I simplify strategies, and how I use, aggregated reports, and how I use different ways to learn like pretty advanced strategies, but in simpler ways, and hopefully present that in a way that can be adapted to different formats, right? So adapted to tournaments or six max cash or what have you. So that's the main overview. Like I'm just trying to sort of coach the user of the course as well as I can like package the method that I would use to coach them if they were actually my student.
Yeah. And what kind of grounding does someone have to have already to get the most out of your course? Like if someone's still looking on the hand rankings card that comes with their cards, they're not going to be the perfect person for it. But where on the spectrum, like, is it worth it for people to start getting involved in this kind of calculated study?
Yeah, what I've sort of been telling, I found this with my coaching as well. I've started to get a better sense for like who's ready to be working with me one-on-one. And I think it's very similar to this course. People who have exhausted a few options already before getting to this course are very likely to be the right person for this course. So if you've already tried a couple of courses and they didn't quite work for you, or if you've already tried working with a one-on-one coach, or you bought PO Solver and you were just like, this is confusing, and then you just kind of stopped using it. Like the people who are actively trying to improve already, but they've hit some kind of roadblock, those are the ones that I think it's going to work the best for, because I present a lot of methods for taking down those roadblocks. But we have had I can think of at least one or two people who have come to me asking about the course, and I was just like, honestly, like if this is going to be your first course with Run At Once, or if this is like, hey, I'm thinking of taking poker seriously for the first time, like where should I start? I would say like, no, it's probably not the right fit, because it really does rely on some amount of attempts at improvement have already happened. And it requires that you're willing to take like this full evaluation, which can be pretty daunting for someone who's not, already kind of working on themselves or already working on their game in some way.
Yeah, you heard it here first, folks. So come get your baby steps with our training materials at RecPoker, and then we'll take off the water wings, and you can get out there and learn how to crush it with the killers like Kevin Rabichow. So we're going to set up Chris for the last question, unless we see any more coming up in the YouTube chat. But my friend Phil is saying, "Happy Thanksgiving, Canadians. Go grab an extra cruller and a coffee from Timmy's." So thank you, Phil. Kevin, you lived in Toronto for a while, but as far as I understand it, you're a dirty Yank like the rest of these bums. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess both are true. I am still in Canada, and I'm recently a dual citizen. So I grew up
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. So I grew up in Chicago. Yeah, I guess this is actually my Kim throws on the Canadian flag. I love it.
Yeah, classic with that one.
Yeah, this is my first Canadian Thanksgiving as a citizen, but I've celebrated about 10 or 11 of them up here at this point. So yeah, I've been living in Canada a while.
And was that a Black Friday move? Based on the timing?
Yeah.
And was that all in Toronto?
I lived in Toronto, Waterloo, Sudbury, Ottawa. I've moved around, all in Ontario, basically. I've kind of bounced around, my partner and I. So depending on what fits at the time. Right now we're in Ottawa.
Nice. So you've seen the Big Nickel up in Sudbury. That's the only.
Yes. Oh yeah, you're familiar. Right. Yeah,
definitely. Okay. Well, I was setting Chris up, but now I have to ask a little tangent question here. How have you experienced the geofence in Ontario? How has that changed the way that you're approaching online poker, or has it? Talk about that a little.
Yeah, it has. I am someone who, I guess in the last year or so, has mostly played online tournaments when the series runs. So being geofenced takes a lot of that option away from me, unfortunately. The series that was just happening, I guess 2 weeks ago now, I did make an effort so I'm in Ottawa, which means I'm a 30-minute drive, not even, from Quebec. So I am able to do the whole set up a temporary office and play from a not ring-fenced province. But I did run into some technical issues, and PokerStars ran into some technical issues. So the whole trip was kind of a bust. But at that point, GG was still running WSOP within Ontario. They only just, I think, closed that off on the 30th or October 1st. So I have yet to try WSOP from Ontario. All my sites are moved over. I honestly just haven't really played. I'm familiar with what games are running, and they look, as you would expect in a geofence market, they look healthy but small, essentially. Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what about live? Do you get a chance to play live in Ontario very often? And where, and what's that like?
It hasn't run a whole lot since the pandemic. The best games were often at Playground, just outside of Montreal. And
we know Playground. We love Playground.
Yeah, and I played some at Fallsview. The WPT would come to Fallsview every February, and actually some really big cash games would run. At least the last couple of times that series came, some really big cash games ran. So I was there whenever the series was there, but outside of that, I just mostly stick to staying home and playing online.
Nice. Chris Jones runs our learning material here. He's our membership content director at RecPoker, and every month we have a different theme of the month. The theme this month is 3-betting from the point of view of the aggressor. So Chris, why don't you see if you can pick Kevin's brain a little on that subject?
Yeah, Kevin, thanks. This has been great hearing all your answers to Jim. And one thing that we've been sort of exploring as a community around 3-betting is that, I think recreational players, serious recreational players, have an understanding that they have to 3-bet not just their best hands, but have, some balance of kind of bluffs and value in their 3-betting range. But then I think a lot of players that I talk to understand that, try it, do it, but then the post flop is where they really, it's all starts to sort of melt down a little bit. And I think a lot of recreational players tend to over c-bet once they've started that line of aggression that they can't stop, and they're almost c-betting 100% of the time. But then they sort of can't, they also struggle to sort of continue that in later streets. So I'm wondering if you can, and like,
Yeah.
I think later streets become really underbluffed by recreational players. So like on the C betting, on the flop, they're probably over bluffing, and on the later streets, they're kind of under bluffing. I'm wondering if you can just talk in general about some initial sort of thoughts you might have about approach to post flop as the 3-bet aggressor. For somebody who sort of understands the fundamentals of 3-betting, but like maybe gets themselves into too much trouble in post flop spots.
Yeah, totally. It's something that I've had to work on with a lot of my students, specifically because depending on the format that they're playing, they might be using a more polarized 3-betting range, or they might be using a more linear 3-betting range. For a while, I worked with like online 6-max players. Almost all of my students for a while were online 6-max players, and most of them just have a very linear 3-betting strategy, because that's like, it's simple and it's very close to the solution. So they probably didn't have the exact same problem that you're describing. Whereas a lot of like the heads up players that I work with, or the tournament players who play shallow stacked, would be working with these 3-bet bluffs more frequently. And they definitely run into the same issues you're describing. One thing that comes to mind is just thinking about that structure, at least in the way I just described it, whether you're polar or linear, and letting that carry over to your flop play to some extent. Because I find that in a lot of situations, if you were linear pre-flop, so the way I think about linear is like lots of high cards, lots of pairs, then when the board comes, it should be pretty obvious to you whether it's a good board for you or a bad board for you. Like if there's lots of high cards on the board, it's good for you. If there's lots of low cards on the board, it's probably average at best, very likely to be bad for you. Or, if it's just like a paired board with nothing, then again, it's probably quite good for you, because maybe even high cards are a good hand. So if you can gather that, you can pretty quickly determine if like continuation betting with everything is fine. Oftentimes it is. And oftentimes we can just, bet and then move on to the turn and kind of start dissecting our range from the turn. But going back to the idea of like, if you have 3-bet bluffs pre-flop, I think it's pretty important to take that polar mentality to the flop very often. The only exception to this would be if your bluffs happen to connect really well with the flop. But I don't think this is very common. So, but the way I'm thinking about it is like, okay, I'm segmenting my good value hands and my bluffs right away on the flop. And that helps me figure out across future streets, any of these bluffs are viable to continue bluffing, right? We don't need to fear continuing to bluff just because it's not a good hand, like not a good equity hand or not a draw or whatever. That's fine. You bluffed pre-flop. You've got a good, you have a good board. It's quite possible you just have to keep bluffing regardless of, if your hand has equity or not. And I think that's what holds people up a lot. I mean, I'm not sure if this has been your experience, but I know if someone's 3-betting pre-flop with like the ace-4 offsuit and it comes king jack 6, like they're just so hesitant to find a way to bluff this hand, even though it's probably a really good spot on turns and rivers to keep bluffing this hand.
I love that. This has been a phenomenal interview. I feel like we got some coaching, which is my favorite interviews end up being coaching sessions, which I'll just selfishly jump in there and soak up all that I can. If folks want to take the course, what's the best way for them to find a link to it? We'll put a link in the show notes, of course, but is it just Run It Once, the homepage there, or is there a back door, or what's the super secret entrance in?
Yeah, Run It Once should guide you there pretty easily. The sale is closing later today, so they might not be pushing it on the homepage quite as much, but you will find it in the courses section. It's called the Game Plan, and yeah, just on Run It Once's website is the best place to find it.
Fantastic. And yeah, if you're listening to this live, it's not too late. You can go get a discount on it by checking it out tonight, the night of the recording. Have you heard from Matt Matros's lawyers about the titling of the course? Has that come up? Have you received any registered mail?
I have not yet, and maybe that's something I need to look into myself, because this is my first time hearing about it.
Oh no, really? Oh, Matt's got Matt Matros. He's got a book out there called The Game Plan, which is sort of helping less experienced players find some simple rules to follow. And I just thought it was too good to bring it up.
That must be why. That makes sense that it's. I remember doing a bunch of Google searching when we were workshopping the names, trying to make sure that we didn't, interfere with searches, right, at the very least. But obviously, copyright, we don't want to.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense that we wouldn't have come across a book. That's an oversight on our part.
There you go. Well, I'll just mute this whole section of the interview. No one has to know. This is just between us. All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. If folks want to get more in touch with you, what's your preferred method of communication? Social media, email, smoke signals? What's the best way?
Yeah, probably best is email or through my website. My full name.com is where my private coaching happens. KevinRabichow.com. There's an email link that you can easily find on there, a contact page or whatever. But I am on Twitter and Instagram. It's my first initial and last name, K Rabichow, on Twitter and Instagram.
Fantastic. And we'll put all those links in the show notes. So if you're listening to the audio version of this, just click over to the show notes. So you can find all those links to get in touch with Kevin and take advantage of this fantastic, amazing poker mind. Well, that was a treat. Kevin, thank you again. I hope we get to have you on. We also do the forums edition of the podcast from time to time. So I might try and bend your ear down the road a little bit, see if we can talk some even more strategy about some of the stuff when the right time comes around. Yeah, that'd be great. Anytime. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on. Cheers, Kevin. Well, we're going to roll on, talk about some home game results and some new schedule tweaks and some other fun stuff coming up here. So we'll say goodbye to you tonight, but thank you again for that. That was a treat. Thanks. Take care. All right. So we've been looking forward to that one. I've heard Kevin, actually, he was on the Thinking Poker podcast recently, which I don't mind saying is my favorite poker podcast. And so he talks a lot about different solvers, his approach to learning, using templates to kind of get this economy of scale that he's talking about earlier in the episode there. So I'd encourage everyone to go listen to the Thinking Poker podcast. It should have come out, I think, a week or two before this one. They'll get some great information about all that kind of stuff. All right, well, let's roll into home game land. We've tweaked the schedule a little bit. We're doing our Tuesday night online play and hang again, which means that we've moved the Fun Country OPA, the online play and hang, to Thursdays. So it goes on Thursdays now at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central. It's a shorter game because it's a 9-handed sit and go, and it's free to play for premium members, and the winner gets $25. So there have been a few seats available too in this one. So if it's Thursday and you don't have any plans and you want to turn nothing into $25, then head on over to rec.poker, join the OPA group, and you'll find the link to join there. The winner this week was Dave Evil Roy Westerveld, and Dave and Eric Jin have been kind of cutting it up lately. One of them, you got to go through Dave or Eric if you're going to win the Fun Country OPA. So congratulations to Dave. And yeah, John, why don't we roll into our PokerStars home game club results?
All right. Well, we have 2 weeks worth of home game results because for a little while, PokerStars was being a little finicky and wasn't giving me the results.
It's rude. But do they know how hard you work? Do they know?
Well, I hacked into their system and downloaded all of the files. And no, I did not. Just to let everyone know, I did no hacking.
God mode. He's playing God mode, everyone. This explains so much.
Okay, so on September 26th, Magra44 got his 6th nightly event for the year.
Dark.
Bruce K54 got his 3rd nightly event for the year. Glassjaw 2222, Dave Schoen got his 3rd nightly. Uncle Tom's Cabin got his 4th nightly. Uncle Hoots, Brett Barhoover, got his 1st nightly for the year.
Back to big deal. Uncles.
Yep. Different uncles, but back-to-back.
No, sir. That's a very avuncular part of the week there, I'd say. Exactly.
A big deal, 1992, Brent DeHaven got his 4th nightly victory for the year. J.S. Edom.
We got him, guys.
Yes.
We got him. All right. Thank you,
I love this.
Jeff.
This is my favorite player, whoever this
together.
is. We need new players like this.
Well, he's an old player, and I can't remember what we decided to do. His name is Jeff S., so maybe his last name is Sedum. So maybe it's Jeff Sedum, but his initials are Jeff S. Anyway, 7th nightly victory, so not a new player.
Not a new player, but...
No, but he's still bringing the hook.
Still bringing the heat.
Like.
Yeah, that may have been more to do with my ineptitude than his particularly hard to pronounce name.
John, your ineptitude is your answer for everything around here. We all know it's not true.
My ineptitude is boundless. Bone Crusher 14, Marcel Dusk got the second mixed victory for the year.
Good for him.
Then Pet Vet 33 got her second international victory for the year.
Let's just skip all the pet vets that are coming up. There's like 10 of them in a row, aren't there?
This was a big week, wasn't it? Holy cow.
I mean, if we do that, then we may as well stop announcing things. It's like half the announcement
week at RecPoker. It seemed like.
And I want you to know there was at least one where she got a second place instead of a first. So it could be even worse. Rosie Q, Roz Quarto got her third international victory for the year. And then Pet Vet 33 won the daily LPP event, her second of the year. So she, of course, can contact Jim at rec.poker for a free month at Learn Pro Poker.
Oh, yeah.
And now I have a little confession to make. As we're coming into the next week's stuff, I made an executive decision that Kim really wanted to let everyone know that she was Kim Kilroy. So I went in on her behalf and made her name public. Now, if that was an error, I am more than willing to change it back, but I'm assuming that you didn't want your name to be private on these things. So just letting you know. Anyway, for the No Limit Hold'em Championship Silver Series, we have Pet Vet 33, Kim Kilroy. Won the
for our audio listeners,
this is why
Pet Vet has covered her face up.
This is why you have to come to watch the video versions of these. This is amazing. Yeah, nicely done, Kim. So sorry, John. We didn't mean to interrupt you there. You said Kim was in the middle of winning something else. Is that right?
Yeah, the No Limit Hold'em Championship Series.
What?
Oh, wow. The Wednesday night?
The Wednesday night.
Oh, is nothing sacred. Kim's just going to come in and trash us all at everything.
I know. What is going on?
She offers coaching, folks. She offers coaching. I'm just saying. Kim Kilroy, come get a piece of Pet Vet.
And then Frogman Rick got his fourth nightly victory for the year.
There you go, Rick.
Hot Rod Bunny got his or her first victory for the year.
Oh, yeah, that was on Tuesday, right? Yeah, I remember we watched that in the OPA. Joe Cool was doing his best to close the door, but Hot Rod Bunny came through with a win. Nicely done, Hot Rod Bunny.
And what day follows Wednesday?
In Canada, it's Thursday. I don't know how you guys do things down there.
Thursday. Well, then on October 6th, which also follows Wednesday, October 5th, Pet Vet 33, Kim Kilroy, won her eighth nightly victory for the year.
This is an all-time heater.
33rd victory all time.
Wow.
But
then on the 7th, not to take anything away from the winner of this event, but on the 7th, she got second place. But enough about that, because I want to make sure that Chilada, Ben, got his second nightly victory from the year and deserves all the kudos there.
Well, he had to beat Kim heads up, so he's obviously some kind of wizard master already, and I know that about Ben already. We've chatted before. So congratulations, Ben. Nice way to go.
And on October 8th, Megger 44 got his seventh nightly victory for the year.
He's back. Bookends.
This is his 44th victory lifetime.
Wow.
So Kim is still 11 behind.
I know. Well, he's been doing it longer. He's been doing it longer. OG.
Then, Now Then KB got his first daily mixed victory for the year.
You're doing great, John.
Yeah. East Coast spinner Ben Enslow got his fourth international victory for the year.
Nice. He loves those internationals.
Isma got his second international victory, or her.
You just gloss right over Isma now. I mean, that used to be the one that would trip you up. Yeah, it's a little disappointing.
Yeah, well, that's because I figured it out. Isma.
He won enough.
Speaking of Isma, he also won the LPP Sunday event.
Whoa!
So his first lifetime, he can contact, or she can contact Jim at rec.poker for the free month at Learn Pro Poker.
There you go, Isenma. And if memory serves from your old days of struggling with it, Spike was the name of that person. I still don't know if that's the real name or not, or if it's a boy
I
or
know
a girl,
it was the name, but it's now private. So and I don't know if something happened to the settings on the site that a bunch of people became private. I know I got rid of my special cheat sheet that Steve had originally created, so that people can control their privacy.
So if you're like Isenma and you win one of these and you want us to shout you out using your real name, you just got to go to the profile field and make sure that you've got your information public there, your first and last name. And John's even put a little FAQ on the home game page showing people how to do it with some screenshots and that. So if you go to rec.poker/home game, you can find everything you need to know to make yourself famous in the rec poker world with John Somsky. And
to be clear, it's the extended profile portion that you need to go into. That's where
there's a second, there's like a second tab you have to hit. Is that what it is?
That's the second tab.
So folks, head on over to rec.poker. You'll see your name up on the top right there. Hit that into your own personal settings on your profile. And there's just that second little tab with all that hidden information. And that's what we'll do for that. But Spike, do send me an email, please. Jim@rec.poker. You have earned yourself through your valor and skill and merit, destroying the other comers in the Sunday night Learn Pro Poker Rec Poker home game. You've won a free month at Learn Pro Poker, and they do a lot of great stuff there. You're going to love it. We're actually having Ryan LaPlante back on the show in November. The theme of the month in November is defending against 3-bets. So we're going to be talking to Ryan about calling 3-bets, hands you can fold to 3-bets, how to proceed with balanced 4-betting range and when that's required. So if you want to get into that kind of good stuff and everything else that they have going over there, please do. Spike, send me that email, jim@rec.poker, and we'll get you all sorted out. And then John, I thought you were, there's also the tables. There's a little more room around the tables in the home game this month, isn't there? Has anyone else noticed that?
Oh yeah, that's the other confession that I should make. I accidentally made most of the home games this month 6 max. And that was not intentional. So enjoy it while it lasts.
We were having a lot of fun in the Tuesday night OPA last week. Because as people would realize that it was 6 max, it was like, oh yeah, has this been 6 max the whole time? I think when they got down to 3-handed, one of the players typed into the thing, hey, wait, are we playing 6 max? I was like, yes, you've beaten 49 out of the 52 people in this tournament, and now you're realizing that it's 6 max. That's too funny. But it's a cool variant, and I know we kind of talked about it a bit with Kevin on the show earlier.
Yeah.
Now, let's steal a little strategy chat here. We won't go too deeply into it, but do you guys feel like you need to play a wider range of hands when you're playing 6 max? Do you just chop off the early position part of your opening ranges? How do you guys adjust to playing 6 max when it's that time?
Yeah, I tend to just chop off the early part. I might make it slightly wider, but it's closer to just saying, what you'd play in a 9 max game. Just throw away the first 3 positions and start from the 4th.
Yeah,
Kim, did you have something there?
Yeah, me too.
No, just slightly tighter than that, just because you don't have the bunching effect of people having thrown away 3 bad hands before you act.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say yes, I would play the same as a 9 ring from the, say, low jack would be under the gun. Although tightened up maybe a pip or 2.
And then just remember, like we talked about, you're paying 1.5 big blinds every 6 hands instead of every 9 hands. So your overall win rate, you're going to have to squeeze a little more out of the hands that you're playing because you're going to be paying those blinds a little more. And you're going to be playing them more frequently. Well, that was fantastic. Michael in the chat asks, is tonight Tournament of Champions 6 max? I don't think so, but I'll let John respond.
Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. It wasn't intended to be. Whether or not it is, who knows?
Yeah, it might have been retroactively done on purpose. We're not sure yet, Michael. So go and check that out. And yeah, we'll see tonight. It is the second Monday of the month. So it's tonight's Tournament of Champions. Producer Jim will be recording it. And just like every month, we record the final table. And this is open to all of our community members. You don't have to be a premium member to take part of this, but you can join us. Everyone who makes the final table is invited to join me for the online review and hang. We'll do this on the fourth Wednesday of the month. We get together and we just play back the video of the final table being played out with some of the folks that were there. And so you can talk about what they had, why they made the decisions they made. We can kind of give each other the gears a little bit and celebrate some great plays. It's a really cool way to review your hands and to get some feedback in real time from other RecPoker members. So you don't have to be a premium member for that. If you make the final table of the Tournament Champions, you've earned yourself a seat on the online review and hang. So we actually give everyone who makes the final table of the Tournament Champions a free month at RecPoker, because obviously they're serious, they want to get more involved, and that free month will give them a chance to unlock all sorts of great stuff we do here. We don't talk enough about this. I'm just going to take one quick second. Our Learning with Partners program. So Andrew Feist runs this every month. We go behind the scenes of sites like Ryan LaPlante's Learn Pro Poker, Matt Berkey's Solve for Why, Jonathan Little's PokerCoaching.com, Sky Matsuhashi's The Poker Forge, Red Chip with James Sweeney. I'm missing a couple here because there's so many amazing partners that we have. The MTT Poker Academy with Gareth James. All these amazing training sites have made some of their available, some of their paid premium paywalled material available to RecPoker premium members. So if you, and not a little either, we get like 15 minutes a month from each one of these sites that we get to choose to base around Chris's theme of the month that month. So if you're a premium RecPoker member, you can come and look through our archive of years now of amazing premium material, all based around certain themes, all from these amazing training sites. And if like Kevin was saying, if you've found your baby steps here with RecPoker and you want to graduate to the real killers in the poker world, we've usually got some good discounts for you as well to join their coaching programs or their training sites or to go one-on-one with a coach. So I would encourage people, we don't talk about it enough, but I don't know any other training site in the world that has this kind of relationship with other poker training sites, and it's really valuable. The members that do take advantage of it get a lot out of it. So do come on over to RecPoker, give that premium membership a try for $5 for your first month, and help us keep the lights on and become a better poker player yourself.
Now, I have two more things, Jim.
Yes, do it.
First, I can confirm that the TOC will be 9-handed.
All right.
And second, I just noticed that Kim said she was already a lifetime member to Learn Pro Poker.
Doesn't surprise me. Smart person.
I am just wondering if we would want to offer that as the food pantry plan for tonight instead of a membership to us.
That's a great idea, John. That's a great idea. Okay. So, folks, I see we've got a few people watching around here. It is that time. You want to be quick with this one. I typed those words food bank into the chat real quick. And the winner of the draw, it's not a draw, we roll a nerdy die. But you're going to get a free month at Learn Pro Poker, and that is a very valuable thing that you will enjoy. So while people are putting that together, I'll just say we're doing some schedule tweaks over the next little while. You'll see in October and in November, we're changing the time of some events. We're changing the day of some events. We've gotten some feedback from some members that it's hard for them to make certain ones. And we're going to be releasing a few more videos as well to our premium members, which I'm excited about. So there's going to be a lot of new stuff coming up. That's why I wanted to just remind our premium members, we've got this amazing website. We change things on it from time to time. We recently did a pretty big reorg that Chris was very involved with this summer. And so if you're new to the website, or if you're not exactly sure of how to get exactly what you want out of it, I've been doing a bunch of one-on-one just video chats with members. So if you're a premium member and you want to just hang out with me for 15 minutes and talk poker and review the website and learn where all the great things are and what to click and what to show up on, and we can go see what the different events are and that kind of thing, just send me an email, jim@rec.poker. We'll find a time to get together and spend 15 minutes chatting poker over Zoom and having a great time doing it. So I'm looking forward to that. And really, don't be a stranger. It's one of the most fun things that I can do in a day is take 15 or 20 minutes and talk to premium members about poker. Because I don't know if I mentioned it at the top of the show, I have the best job in the world. All right. So we got a few people typing in to the food bank here.
I have one thought before we get to the dice roll. It struck me that when John didn't know what format the game was for the Tournament of Champions, that he may have accidentally invented like the next great thing in poker. You know, like everyone's crazy about mystery bounty format. What if there was a mystery format tournament where you showed up and like they spun the wheel and it was like, okay, now you're playing, you know, PLO, or I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, Schrodinger's format, right?
Yeah,
I like that idea.
Similar to kind of a mixed game.
Yeah, but it's like it doesn't mix, right? You just show up, you pay your money, you don't know what it is until you sit down and they're like, okay, we're playing stud.
I assume there'd be no late registration then.
Yeah,
because otherwise that'd be kind of against the point.
Yeah, no late reg.
Interesting.
All right. Well, here we're going to, Kim was talking about bunching earlier, having to do with card removal. We're going to do some bunching here as well. So we're going to start with Michael. I'm going to roll the die here, my nerdy D&D die. Let's see who the winner of a free month of Learn Pro Poker is. It's Michael. Of course it's Michael. I didn't roll a 1, but I rolled in the 1. I rolled in the first bunch. So there you go. But it wasn't a 1. That's something. The mechanics of the loaded dice seem to be, you know, at least equalizing over time. So we got something to say for that. So Michael, you know my email address. We chat all the time. I actually sent you an email just this morning or yesterday, small world. So please send me an email, jim@rec.poker, and I'll set you up with your free month at Learn Pro Poker. You are going to love it. Okay, speaking of loving it, I got nowhere to go with that. Does anyone else want to add anything? Kim, you're doing a hand history review later this month, but we're going to nail down the date because with your busy, exciting poker travel life, I don't know if you've seen Kim's calendar, but you can click on basically any day in her calendar and there's like 5 different poker tours that day. And she just has to choose which one she's going to travel to and go dominate the live poker streets. I really want to be Kim Kilroy. I really want Kim's life. She sounds like she's got this all figured out. So yeah, pay attention. Go to the rec.poker homepage. If you just scroll down a little bit, there's a calendar right there. It shows everything that's happening this week. And it's a great way to stay current. So
I think we're doing it the 18th. Sorry.
The 18th? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That's the third Tuesday this month. So
I like how you guys just gave my Learn Pro Poker month away. What if I was gifting that to someone? Like,
oh, that's true. Yeah. Well, then don't put it in the chat that you're already a lifetime member.
You had time to speak up. Of course, it would have been kind of hard. We're going to give away this to the members. No,
you're not.
No, you're not.
But if you really want, I will pay for someone to have a free month at Learn Pro Poker, the person of your choice.
I'll just have to try and win another Sunday night.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
I also want to say that the rumor that's going around is definitely not true. We will not be tripling the number of home games that we play each month.
I mean, you know, let's keep the door open, John. You never know what might happen. People just clamoring for this home games. We're starting turning people away at the door. Isn't that right? Do we have a solution yet for our 500 cap? Do we know what's happening there when the time comes?
No, we don't. But actually right now we have a fair amount of room. We're at like 384.
Oh, good.
Because there were a bunch of people who, after we decided you had to be a member of RecPoker, never did that. So I've kicked them all out, which gave us some breathing room.
Excellent. So there's still room in there, folks, to sign up. We play 10 home games a week. They're phenomenal. They're the toughest play money home game in town, as far as I'm concerned. People take it really seriously. It's part of our learning program here. We take a lot of hands from the home games and talk about them on the show or in the forums or that kind of thing. So do go and check that out and join up. It's a lot of fun. Well, then I want to thank, let me see, Martha and Joseph and Michael, who were chatting away, and Phil. And let me see, I know I'm going to miss a couple people, but everyone who was typing in the YouTube chat, thank you so much. Your contributions and engagement there helps make our job more fun and even easier. So I love that. And of course, I have to thank Kim and John and Chris, without whom I couldn't host the show, because it would just be me talking for an hour. Nobody wants that. Of course, Kevin Rabichow, who did a great job. I can't wait to have him back on the forums episode. And our sponsors like Mark Prashon at Website Amp and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. But mostly it's you, the listeners. Thank you so much, listeners. We'll see you next week. I like that. I like that.